Hello, everyone. My name is Damon Raynor. I'm representing Collins Aerospace as an employee, also as a leader of the Employee Engagement Council. I also represent Rockford Promise as a board member. I'm curious as to know how we are processing data that we collect and how we are interpreting that data. What organizations are you relying on, if it is an organization, in order to analyze and interpret the data that you have?
The collection of data and how data has been used historically has had some very positive and negative impacts on the world, on our country, and on the community. Of course, it's very important to make sure that the data that you're collecting is valid, make sure that you're increasing as much anonymity as possible for those that are providing the data, and also that you're not just cutting the data so that you get what you want and not really looking at the rest. We are not working with another organization to run the survey that we did. I actually created the survey myself based on some of my experience working in academia. So, not saying that is the way you should do it. It was just how I envisioned doing it myself. It's always best to have a non-biased party to run any sort of data, because then you're not going to run into any issues where someone will say, oh, well, they just kind of narrowed me down as much as possible. And, that's not what we want. But you want to make sure that you get as much data as possible to help you answer your question. I like to go in and really understand what type of hypotheses or assumptions might I have about whatever I'm collecting data on, just because I'm a researcher at heart. But still, I'm looking at all of the data and not just saying, well, if I look at maintenance, and if you're a millennial and you're in maintenance and you're a female, well, I just narrowed it down to 2 people in our organization, and I'm going to definitely just make sure I pay attention to that and not talk about the rest of the organization. We have to look at it holistically, and having those demographics will really just help us inform what areas of our organization we need to make better equity decisions rather than just targeting those portions. We utilized SurveyMonkey for our survey. We didn't use any sort of internal survey process. First of all, we don't have a sophisticated program in order to do it, and also we wanted to make sure it was something that was off our database and more in a cloud. I think you probably could run something internally through paper, but you're going to create some issues potentially there. Right now, we're really just looking at what are the averages, the means, the standard deviations, and really understanding as we cut the data, where do people feel? What are their feelings based on the different factors that we've measured?
We're lucky enough that we are affiliated with an international organization who has a chief diversity officer and an entire team of people at Habitat for Humanity International. On a quarterly basis, we report our statistics and our information to Habitat International. And then on an annual basis, we give them even more information. In turn, then HFHI turns out all of our economic impact reports and our local statistics specifically for our community, but then also the state of Illinois. We're able to then use that information to take to Washington, D.C. when we're lobbying, to our congressmen and women. We're able to take that to Springfield. Right, they arm us with a tremendous amount of information. Our job is really just to report the work that we're doing, the demographics of the people that we have the privilege of serving, and then honestly, our HFHI team, research and management team, does a lot of that stuff for us. As a small nonprofit organization, less than $4 million annual budget, we wouldn't be able to do that kind of work and use that kind of information if we didn't have a parent organization that is as dedicated to belonging as Habitat International is.
The Collins folks are familiar with this, but we use something we call a pulse survey. Years ago, we did away with the 200-question employee survey and went to something that's 10 questions or less, takes only a couple minutes to fill out, and it's done once a quarter. There's a couple things, and the first I would say is people need to feel safe for submitting that data and know that there's anonymity. And that means if you're a manager and you only get a certain number of responses, you actually won't get individual data, because you may be able to do what Matthew referred to, and they may be able to single out, oh, I bet that's the person that answered this question that way. So that's the first thing, is making sure people feel safe with the data. But the second one that I would say is, don't be satisfied with a positive number. It would have been really easy a couple years ago for us to look at it and say, wow, the non-discrimination score is really good. The Speak My Mind is really good. It wasn't until HR helped us dig through that data that we understood, guess what? the production and maintenance population actually is feeling excluded because a lot of the messages and a lot of the focus we're putting out there doesn't speak to them in the environment in which they work and what their lives look like right now. The other thing it helped us understand is that we treated Rockford as the center of the universe, which I know it is.
You are right.
But EPS, Electric Power Systems, our business here, we have 5 sites that we're responsible for. But if we had a town hall, we held it in person, in the atrium, in Plant 6, in Rockford. That meant if you weren't physically in that room, you really didn't belong within Electric Power Systems. And we might get to you sometime this year and have a similar message, which said suddenly we've got to do this virtually because it was the only way to reach the entire population at the same time where they were all getting the same message. And so it was little things like that, little comments that came up. It's not just the data, but the comments as well that help you realize there are underlying themes that are going to affect those 10 numbers that come out of a survey as brief as that.
I'm Esther Lodge. I work for Alignment Rockford. I'm the Ready to Learn project manager. We work with community data to help support education outcomes for young children so that when they arrive at kindergarten, they're ready to learn. If we look at the maps, we see that the west side of Rockford and the southeast side of Rockford has children drastically struggling in their development. What kind of role do you think, or do you even think it is a role of businesses, business leaders, organizations to look at the equity challenges that employees have, such as childcare? What would be your hope or your challenge or your word of inspiration to our community and what we can look at and do for those individuals facing those equity challenges?
If any of you have tried to recruit people to Rockford, you do it in the summer because a majority of the country don't own snow blowers like we do. So one of the things that's dawned on us is growing our own talent here is the most effective way to retain talent. And so we've become more aware that we've got to be able to help people grow within our community. Now, if you just look at data, it would be really easy to say, well, you can best influence careers if you get to them in that 6th to 8th grade range, because that's when the decision making takes place. To your point, their journey starts far before that. And so we've got to make sure that we're looking at what do we need to do to ultimately influence graduation rates, the direction people are going, and things like that. And so when you look at the responsibility of businesses, we can't just put a 40-foot wall up around our business and say we're good if we make money. The reality is this needs to be a community where we can attract talent, we can grow talent, and our people need to be proud to live here. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing what we need to be able to support that. I was extremely humbled a few years ago. There was a few of us working the community council, and we got a call from Collins Central, corporate, they, them. And they said, hey, we actually were doing a demographic study across the country and where our sites are, and we realized that there was underprivilege in Rockford, especially in the elementary schools. They said, we set aside, I don't remember what it was, I want to say it was about $150,000. Can you help us get in touch with somebody that could make a difference in the community? Sure. So we put them in touch with some folks from Haskell and a couple other organizations, and they came in and they worked out an agreement. I got taken out of it. They worked it out together, but it was a deal where the corporation realized their 7th largest site in all of Raytheon Technologies was in a community where they had a specific need in the area that you just mentioned. And I think it's that type of use of data and understanding things like you just described that are important for all of us to understand, because those kids aren't going to be able to solve that problem on their own.
First of all, thanks for the work that you do in our community. I've always been really proud of the work that Alignment Rockford does as workplaces, whether we're nonprofits and employ 20-some people or large corporations like Collins Aerospace that's leading these efforts. I think every single person needs to be aware of, right, the opportunities that children are afforded when their parents have a workplace that is supportive, a workplace that understands the needs of the children in their family, an organization. We recognize how important it is for families to have flexibility and for parents to have flexibility. We understand, right, educational outcomes increase when people have a safer, more stable environment to call their own. So many things affect the educational outcomes of our students, pre-K all the way up through college seniors. And workplaces when they embody that and they believe that and they believe in investing in their workforce that isn't just investing in that one individual employee, but it is investing in their entire family's success, then I think our entire community will be more successful.
I want to celebrate Damon because in organizations, there are many people like Damon that stand up and say things, and it can come off abrasive or aggressive or angry or maybe too informative, and people don't receive it. So then you can't really move that needle of belonging. How can you ensure that your employees can have that space to be open and honest with how they feel and not be penalized for their experiences?
I think it starts with having a perspective that all points are valid and people bring to the workplace and into their human interactions everything about them. And so if somebody's willing to step forward, you need to be willing to listen. Brutal honesty helps me grow. And if I don't know that I need to address something, I can't fix it. And so hopefully in my own organization, we have a posture that feedback is welcome, even if it's hard. A couple of years ago when we had our community listening sessions and our welcoming diversity feedback group conversations, that's the approach that we who were listening took into it, that this feedback might be hard, it might be good, it might lead to a path of discovery that we don't know where it will lead yet, but we need to receive it, we need to hear it if somebody's willing to speak up. I'm not saying that at home or at work I do that perfectly all the time. If we come with that vantage point that honesty and good dialogue will help us grow, hopefully that will create spaces where employees and volunteers and people in the community feel safe to share their feedback and to ask their questions.
I brought up failure earlier, and one of the best learning sources are failures, especially other people's, if you can see those. So I think back to a time, this was probably about 7 years ago, very hectic program that we were on, a lot of difficult aspects of the program, things like that. My partner on that program chimed in on this daily morning call, 75 people on this. It was when we were using WebEx prior to Zoom. And he started with, well, this may be a stupid question, but, and then he asked his question. And the response from the president of the program at the time was, well, you're right, that is a stupid question, and this is why. Ryan didn't speak up for a really long time, like months after that. And so that has been burned in my brain for years and years. And so we can say all we want, we can put all these words out there and propaganda and pretty slides and everything else, but what you do is going to be the ultimate decision maker on how people feel. And I'd like to say that there's a reason that Damon's comfortable coming forward. It's because the people that I work with out here make it a comfortable environment for people to bring these things up and have asked these questions. But there's no replacement for modeling the behavior. And I gotta say, if I can think about every email I've gotten telling me how evil I am, that I made people wear masks for the last 2.5 years, how I wanted to reply was not how I could reply, because everybody has an opinion and they're all valid. And so we have to think about that. Sometimes our emotional response is not the right one, and we have to think about that and decide, if I was that person sending that email or asking that question, how would I want to be treated if I was bringing something up that I knew might not be the most popular subject?
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I think it's really twofold, that you set the expectation, that you say it, that you welcome people's opinions, you give opportunity in meetings for people to share their opinions, you solicit feedback as things happen, but then, as Eric was saying, you do something with it. So you don't just say, we're a workplace that allows people to share their feelings, right? But that you do actually create a safe space for them to share those ideas, and then you act upon them. If they are problems that need to be solved, then you, in earnest, solve the problem. That you continue gathering feedback, and that you are a person of your word. Your actions speak so much louder than just the words coming out of your mouth. And so I think the best way as an organization to offer that safe space is to say it and do it.
How do you address the issue where you make your support staff, and when I say support, the people that don't make the money, like the marketing or HR or receptionists, to make them feel as they belong and they're important, where most of the time the career paths support the people that bring in the money.
There's a template for each of the businesses within Collins and describes it. What's your annual revenue? How many employees? They all say how many engineers we have. And it was just last week we were somewhere and I go, I'm not sure why we always say that. We never say how many contracts people we have, because they actually take the orders that make the money, or how many people actually put product out the door, because that's what we sell. And so nothing against engineers. I am one. At least I used to try to be one. But the reality is everybody does play a role. And it's interesting you bring that up. One of the things we just talked about in my last town hall was we have 3 stakeholder groups. We have employees, we have shareholders, and we have customers. And if we did this right, everybody in one sentence could say, how do they contribute to each of those 3 stakeholder groups? Here's what I do to serve the customers, to serve my fellow employees, and to serve the shareholders. If I could get everybody to be able to write out those 3 sentences, I would be able to declare success on that, because then everybody knows how they contribute, which essentially creates a sense of belonging, and suddenly things like how big their monitor is and how big their office is doesn't matter anymore, because they feel like they belong, and it's really important for them to know that.
At the Park District, we have a core value of one team, one goal, right? So although it's the facilities and the frontline staff that you kind of see on a day-to-day basis, there's all this administrative support staff that's really helping get things done, right? I mean, even last year, whenever we were going through our budgeting process, we made an intentional effort to hire a recruiter, because we didn't really think about how could we bring new talent into the organization to service those frontline parts of the organization. It is a challenge, I would say, to bring in that support staff to make sure that they feel they belong. But we're trying our best to make sure that we listen to them, and we also ensure that we're not talking while they're listening. To be actively listening and to understand what are their needs, how can we meet their needs? Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about our organization at the Park District, it's about the community and the community in which we serve. So if we're meeting the needs of our community as a whole, and we're bringing all of our support staff, all of our frontline staff together to create that, then we achieve success.
My name is Jaime Salgado. I work for Collins Aerospace. I'm also on the county board. How do you guys bring everybody together so they don't feel excluded?
I think it's got to be multiple approaches to be able to go through that. As you go through it, I can't just hold a town hall every quarter and say, all right, here's the 3 things you need to know. Now you should all belong and understand this. Come back, see you next quarter. The reality is you can get some things out in that fashion. You've also got to influence the other leaders who can help carry that message. You've also got to understand the organization enough to know, where do I need to go engage personally and start to understand this better, because I may have a blind spot somewhere, because these people are frustrated and I don't understand why. And I may need to explain why I'm doing things. And so it's really that conversation, and that conversation can happen in large venues like this, but a lot of times conversations go down to a one-on-one discussion. And the other thing I've really learned is that those one-on-one discussions are never one-on-one. The real ones, the real meaty ones, spread like wildfire. And if you're having a very good discussion with some really good outcomes, it's going to spread to the people around them. And it's more of those discussions that you can have, the more impact that's going to have. So it's got to be more surgical. It can't just be one generic approach for everybody. That's honestly why it's a lot of work, because you've got to continue to keep connected with the organization and meet them where they are.
I think there's also something to be said about admitting when you're wrong, or admitting when you have work to do, especially in leadership positions for a nonprofit like mine. That's a board of directors. That's, myself as the senior leader of the organization. We're going to make mistakes. And we're maybe not going to communicate things as appropriately as we should. We may miss the mark sometimes. We may overlook someone's shared experience. The idea that organizations may go to the people of color within their organization to help everybody else understand, and that what we don't recognize all the time is that comes with trauma, and that we have to be a trauma-informed organization as both an individual and organizationally. Barb Chidley. Barb's a member of the board of directors at Rockford Area Habitat for Humanity. And I remember when we first started conversations on our committee about where we wanted to be organizationally, I started every conversation by saying, I have some personal growth. Like, I have a lot of work to do as an individual. And that in order for me to lead an organization down this path and to be a solid, informed, innovative leader, then I also have to look introspectively, which means I have to admit my faults. I have to admit my shortcomings. And I think in having those conversations with your staff, but in a situation like mine, even as the home buyers and homeowners that are going through our program, sometimes you just have to admit that you said it wrong, or that you weren't fully informed, or that you're on this path and you're on this journey, both in self-reflection and organizationally.
One thing that somebody said to me several years ago was that people don't necessarily mind change. They don't want to be changed. They don't want somebody to force change on you. And so inclusion in the process, listening to feedback, I think all of that goes a long way when you're on a change journey. People don't mind change. They'll get there. They just don't want to be forced to change.
I would agree with everything that was said. I mean, I think listening is really important. I think admitting when you make mistakes is really important. I think always being open to learn is really important. I would say we discussed the sign. It's a really funny thing because probably most of you had never even seen the sign or paid attention to the sign. But I remember that city council meeting because it wasn't just that sign. It actually was the same city council meeting that we did not pass an ordinance, and it's probably the only ordinance I can think of that I have proposed to city council that we did not pass, and it was a welcoming ordinance for our community, which is ridiculous that we don't have one. But you can see I've gotten over it. I would say after you do those things, you also have to just be confident in yourself and understand that there are going to be a small group of people who may not always agree with you, and just be confident to move forward after you've listened to people, after you've educated yourself, after you've done those things, that you do have to move forward. Otherwise, it can be just really paralyzing.
Steve Cazzo, full disclosure, I work for one of the panelists up there at Collins Aerospace. The question that comes up actually personally for me, belonging in the digital world with Zoom with our employees, what are tricks or tactics or things that you've learned that have been effective, and especially in the last 2 to 3 years with COVID?
Belonging in a digital world, I think we saw people in their own spaces for the first time, which was, I think, both sometimes terrifying, sometimes really empowering, and I think we learned a lot. The Arts Council, as we were meeting as a board on Zoom, I thought it was really empowering in a way to see individuals in their environment with their children, making dinner, dogs and cats. It struck me how beautifully diverse the Arts Council board is when we saw people in their own environments. As we increasingly are in our digital environment where we're seeing people in new and different ways than sometimes the made-up appearances we all bring to our professional or out in the world personas, I think there is perhaps a healthy way to create belonging or understanding in that Zoom world when we just get to see people as their authentic self.
I'm kind of a natural facilitator. And so in a room full of people, it's so easy to kind of bring people together and, kind of have conversation with them. When we first started moving to kind of Zoom, we were doing that with our committees and our staff meetings. We were doing that with our board meetings. And so there was this opportunity for us to kind of break the ice and to have more kind of conversations around people's interests, right? We would ask people to show us their pets at home, or we did this period of time where we asked people, I'm pointing behind my face right now because I'm apparently on a Zoom screen. We would ask people to put pictures of their most recent vacation, or, we tried to still make that human interaction and human connection with people while knowing that we were spread out all around the community. And it gave us an opportunity to kind of get to know each other on this kind of personal level. We got to see people in their own personal environments. And so there was this really kind of cool opportunity to bond over this idea of shared experience and how many of us have dogs and how many of us have cats, and some people have goats. Like I would have never known, right? My board chair had a baby calf, like during one of our board meetings, right? And so there's that really cool opportunity to kind of bring people together.
Literally during the board meeting?
Well, the calf had been born during the day, and so we all got to see the calf like a few hours old. It turns out that they also, when they had their baby just a few weeks ago, also had a calf the same day that they had their baby, which is hilarious. But yeah, I think there's something really cool about connecting with people virtually when you can't be in person.
The past 2 years have really taught us a few things about the virtual world, just a few. But I think it's important as we move into what I would call probably more of a hybrid work environment. I don't know if we'll ever truly go back to a full lockdown virtual world, hopefully. Really just giving people grace, giving people the flexibility, helping them understand that, work is important, but it's not your life. If you have to go home or you have to be virtual for a little bit, it's all right to have to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to go and take care of my child, I have to go make dinner, I have to do this. Giving people as much grace as possible, because life is hard in general. Let's not overcomplicate it and make their life even more difficult. I really love the idea of sharing personal things and all these other things. Also, we have to be aware that sometimes people aren't outgoing and maybe they don't want to share personal things too. I think we tend to lean more into this extroverted society where sometimes people are more introverted and they just kind of want to be on the Zoom. Maybe they don't even want to be on camera. And maybe they would honestly just provide their comments in the chat. And to be honest, that's okay too. But belonging is really making sure that we're not telling people how to act, but it's understanding how they act, right? It's not we treat others how we want to treat them. We treat them how they want to be treated.
I can't take any credit for this. So Grizz, Duran, and I were recently at a DE&I summit out in Windsor Locks, and there was 40 of us in a room and 3 people on the phone. And so here's what we've learned. We know how to do a meeting in person. We figured out how to do a meeting in Zoom. What we're really bad at is hybrid meetings, especially when a vast majority of the people in the room are in the room and 3 people are on the phone. And the screen we have in front of us doesn't have the camera because we don't know how to do the dual screen thing. So all we see is a presentation. What they did was they had each of the 3 people that were on the phone attached to a buddy that was in the room. And so when they wanted to speak up, they were on an IM with their buddy in the room, and that person could say, hey, Mary has a comment, but she can't break in here. So everybody paused, and that person was able to chime in on the meeting. So it was very eye-opening, but it was hugely effective because otherwise all of us type A people would have just kept rambling on incoherently, and the people on the phone never would have been heard. So that's the useful tip I have, Steve. And again, I deserve no credit for that.
Eric, I think we could probably take a lesson in our in-person world of sometimes people don't feel that they can speak up or they should speak up or there's a moment to break into the conversation. So maybe that IM system, even in our in-person environments, could be very useful.
I would just add that I've learned how to mute my WebEx. My son walked in while I was giving a presentation and he asked if I would come wipe him. That was an eye-opener for me, so I was like, okay, let's use the mute button when I'm not speaking. But with that, I just want to say a sincere thank you to our panelists for providing such wonderful insights and really being leaders in our community and in your organizations to create that sense of belonging. I also want to thank all of you as well for being with us today, and it is really my honor now to turn the mic over to Chris Makajewski, the director of the YWCA and part of the Belonging Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much to this panel. Following you, all of you, is not something that anyone would want to do. You all shared your experiences with us today, and I think everyone here learned something from that. And I think it's extremely inspirational whenever we can do that with people that we know and we have access to. I do want to thank the sponsors for today. Collins Aerospace, Rockford Public Schools, Rockford Chamber of Commerce, the Rockford Park District, and the United Way of Rockford Valley, as well as the Center for Nonprofit Excellence at NIU. And I thank all of you for sticking with us through this very long morning. The task force members, which I am one and proud to be a member of, thank you so much for all of the work that you have put in, especially on today, but on the ongoing basis as we continue to move this work forward. You've heard some really compelling reasons today of why bringing othering and belonging into our workplace and our community is important. And I think all of us in this room today believe that it is something that we need to have in front of us. A majority of the organizations that we talk with feel that bringing this work forward is important. But there's a very slim number of organizations that actually implement any belonging plans. We've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this community for quite a while now, and we really haven't made much significant progress. Nor have we really talked about belonging before now. So what does it mean to be a model employer? You've heard these four talk about it. What steps can you take to bring this back to your workplace? Well, first, there's a QR code on the screen that you can scan, and it's going to take you to the Belonging Rockford website, where you can find a multitude of resources. Regardless of what your industry is, you will find resources there. The website is also listed there. Second, there's numerous ways that you can commit to personally building a culture of belonging in your workplace or your place of business by ensuring voice, agency, and opportunity for all individuals, and ensuring that your workplace reflects the rich diversity of this community. I ask each of you to champion in moving conversations forward and building a belonging culture in your organization. That you work to build strategies, bridges, and develop relationships that are meaningful and trust-filled with diverse people. Be open to listening and learning as part of the journey to understand the separate but related concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to provide tools, resources, mentors, and training, and to be intentional about recruiting that results in a diverse staff, board, and leadership. So thank you for committing your morning to learning more about othering and belonging. We hope that today you'll see the value in co-creating systems, structures, policies, and procedures in your workplaces so that all people can prosper and thrive. Thank you for joining us today.